fooled me once. Shame on you. It fooled me, we can't get fooled again.
All right, welcome everyone to episode 10 of Reframing the Narrative. Woohoo! We made it to 10.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, here's to this and the next 10 and 10 after that. But Jake, good to see you as always, and really excited
to see you.
Yeah, really excited about this episode. Very relevant, actually, because as our viewers will quickly learn, we're going to take on another big paradigm that has effects even to today, even though we're at the 5-year anniversary of worldwide house arrest. But that being said, I was at a gathering last night with some freedom-minded folks, and it just floored me how so many people hang on to certain aspects of, I'll call it bug theory. And yeah, it's sort of like last week's discussion about the moon. There are a number of facts out there and studies that have clearly disproven the idea of bugs that are out to get everyone and kill people. And I always assume that people have gotten past that, at least in the freedom-minded community. And man, people are not willing to hear that that's, one more myth that they've lived throughout their life and have planned their life accordingly. So yeah, what I'm planning is my next solo video to just, poke holes in that particular theory. But yeah, really excited to talk about that a little bit here and kind of where do we go next as we usually do. How do we reframe that narrative? So Jake, I know you've got some opening thoughts. Let me hand it to you.
All right. Well, happy anniversary. And house arrest is definitely the operative description of what we went through. And what was it based on? It was based on claims of bugs circulating around. And just as we're seeing politically, as you mentioned, in the world, when we're out and about, people are still clinging to this idea that there's a savior, a political savior or whatever kind of savior. And then in a similar vein, they might still believe in these invisible bugs, these pathogens that are out to get us, and therefore we need saving from them with certain man-made, man-devised, corporate-devised potions, for instance. And so even if they're kind of halfway there and they understand that there was heavy-handedness, so we say, even some people will be like, it was downright tyranny, and that's where I am for sure. There's a spectrum of people from, full on, they got to have the latest rocket booster. To go back to last week, there's a new bug coming around. They got to get the latest. I was in a pharmacy walking by. I was looking for saline the other day, and I overheard somebody talking to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist was just like telling them, we have this and that available, like all these different things. You want to sign up for this? You want to get this? It was like flavors of ice cream. You want to get this injection or that injection. So here we are in this paradigm. And essentially, I think we can just lay out, what does this paradigm mean? And how is it taken advantage of to make us believe certain things and make us behave in certain ways? And so I think if we want to talk about how we got in the situation of house arrest, it's interesting. I'll give a lot of credit to Eric Coppolino, who he did a chronology of the Scamdemic, and he went back a couple months after house arrest was declared, and he started just gathering all the related articles so he could essentially have a full picture of everything from the gaslighting to, later on, the denial. We never said that. We never told everybody had to do this or that. And he finally declared, okay, that project is over. I think sometime last year. So it was 2020 around May. I could be wrong on that, to about May 2024. So it was a good 4-year project and a full documentation of all news-related articles related to what they did, what was done to us. But if we had been armed with an understanding of how health works, how we're created, and our bodies are capable of taking care of themselves, and we resisted the acceptance of this paradigm of microbugs out to get us, then we wouldn't even have the agencies, or we wouldn't even tolerate the agencies that go around telling us what to do. I wrote down essentially 5 steps to create a scamdemic, and we might have to bleep that, I don't know. But first of all, you claim that there's a pandemic or an epidemic, and this is how it was done to us. Number 2, you make people test. You claim that there is a thing, there's an it, and then you have to test for it. Then you use the test to count cases. And I love to go to a link that's still up, and it shows, it's a commissioners meeting for Collin County, Texas, and it's in May 2020, and they invited somebody from the state health department to explain how cases were being counted. And it's absolutely fascinating and really educational, because the representative, who's being reasonable, she's not pushing craziness. There's actually no one wearing a diaper on their face in this entire video, but she explains essentially, like, right now you need a PCR, so you need a clinical so-called proof of having an infection. And then she explains how now we're going to go from that to probable cases. So you could see the inflation. At the same time, the media is drumming everything up. We're already under house arrest. And she goes, probable. What's a probable case? And she goes into basically it's 6 degrees of separation kind of thing. If you're in Collin County, somebody else is in Collin County, and they have these symptoms, and you went to the same grocery store as them, you're a probable case now. Congratulations, Mazel Tov. And that's how we got this inflation of cases. And then they're constantly on the TV saying that. So that's the counting cases. Then what do? People go and they seek treatment because they're a case, right? Well, I must be sick, even if you're counting asymptomatic cases, which is what they did. And we won't even get into the flawed idea of the testing unless you want to. And then you treat them with deadly protocols like run, death is near, and midazolam. And all the while you're drumming up fear. Now, I'd like to go to something that Eric Coppolino turned me on to. It's at the beginning of his chronology of the scamdemic. He goes all the way back to related situations that we can look back on and kind of tie into what happened in 2020. And he cites a DHS report on mass psychogenic illness from 2006, where essentially it proved to those who run these kinds of things that social trauma and anxiety can combine with a suspicious event to produce psychosomatic symptoms such as nausea, difficulty breathing, and paralysis. And so what happens is that people will they'll seek help, they'll seek treatment because they believe that they're ill and that they have something, they have an it that needs treatment. And that puts you in the hands of the people who will use the protocols that have been prescribed to treat you. And as we know, I know personally of people who lost loved ones who sought treatment, and they went in and they were maltreated as a result of not getting the injections, and they got run, death is near, and they ended up expiring. So this is serious stuff, and it's all based on the paradigm that it's us against bugs, and therefore we need man-made treatment. And so I'll leave you with this, because this is a long introduction here. This, to me, it fulfills the definition of a satanic paradigm. What is satanic? If you look at somebody who is a self-admitted former Satanist, Mark Passio, he describes and defines Satanism. It is essentially denying the laws of nature and then coming up with laws that are man-made, that can be relative, that we can redefine, we can change, and they're flawed as well, because humans are flawed.
It's pure moral relativism. And I could go over the tenets, the basic tenets, which is what most people think. Most people believe that morality is relative. They don't believe morality is objective. And we should actually try to achieve an objective standard of morality that exists in nature. They think it's all relative and we get to make it up.
So just by virtue of that, it's satanic, but he defines Satanism essentially as egotism, moral relativism, social Darwinism, and eugenics. So if you, like a lot of us, believe that this whole thing that we endured was part of a eugenics program, then it falls into that as well. But just by virtue of the idea that God made us imperfect and we need man to step in and treat us for it, is satanic in my book. And I thought by coming up with that notion, I was going a little too far. I was being a little bit hyperbolic in my thoughts. But the more I mulled on it, the more I was comfortable just outright declaring that, yeah, what we're dealing with is really a satanic paradigm. So that was a whole lot. That was my big preamble. What are your thoughts on that, PJ?
Yeah, I agree with all that. And, just thinking about the political saviors, I heard it at least once, if not more, last night at the gathering I was referring to, where someone had referenced RFK, and, thank goodness we've got one on our side who's in there and shaping politics. And it's like, did you not see what he just recently recommended? Speaking of treatments, and he's on the side of big pharma and the system, and yet people cling to these false saviors and turn a blind eye to some of these things that they're doing because they still have this belief that he or anyone else is on their side. I heard plenty of that last night too, and as you said, there is definitely a spectrum of people's level of understanding or willingness to go beyond kind of where they started. And so, yeah, I figured out that RFK was controlled opposition a long time ago. And, I'm sure that would ruffle feathers of certain potential viewers, but it's just a fact. And, he's part of the puppet system, unfortunately, and making that connection to Satanism, I think, is not a far leap. And, that's one of the things to me when I've started grasping the truths of how there aren't bugs out to get us, and that we were truly created in a way that didn't need man-made intervention. One of the things that really bothered me was like, babies come out of the womb and almost instantly they're stabbed multiple times with remedies that their bodies simply can't handle. And I understand why people do it, because they're under the spell, but it's simply satanic in my book to be doing that to children and debilitating them right out of the gate, and then throughout their childhood and into their young adult years. And yeah, it's just as you said, the implications of all of this are real, and it's not just like, oh well, I believe this, and if someone else believes it, then who cares, right? Well, in this case, I mean, go try buy a carton of eggs and see how much inflation has happened to that because of this very theory, and all the hysteria that's happened here in Texas around skin abrasions. And
I think you could say that.
But
red dots.
Yeah. But it is there are real life consequences for not fully understanding the grift that's been pulled on us. And, going back to Pasteur and his fraud, that we never even had a chance to look at his diary until 1993, that the true extent of the fraud and just outright forgery. And, getting back to the satanic angle too, all the experiments that he did or that he had his team do, where they were mutilating animals, injecting stuff into their brains, and then taking leftover junk from that and injecting it into other animals and saying that they proved, some sort of transmission. I don't know how, destruction of animals that logically makes no sense could be anything but satanic. To me, it's a form of alchemy. And I'll give a big shout out to one of our favorite Substack authors, Agent 131711. He did a great series on this very thing, how alchemy and that type of science really ties together, and that there are much darker intentions behind them. And so I think that, just raising the level of awareness for people and poking the holes in some of these trusted paradigms is really important. But as always, people have to be willing to see that and hear it. So that is part of the challenge. But, Jake, I'd be interested in your thoughts about, like, when did you figure out that there was no there, and that, we essentially had been sold a bill of goods?
That was really well said, PJ. First of all, there's a lot there, but I'll just cut to your question. When I realized that there was no there, I think people have a tendency to cling to the idea that there is an it. And so that was the first thing that kind of had to fall. I knew that if there was an it, then it wasn't something that required such drastic measures to avoid or combat. So I was already a bit primed. I was also never, for the last 20 some odd years, I used to live in a foreign country where I was a permanent resident. And I remember applying for permanent residency, going, if they require a certain kind of injection, I'm not going to accept permanent residency. I'll find a way to either stay here without it, or I'll repatriate to America. So I already had that awareness 20 and some odd years ago, and I did not believe in the interventions. But the first thing, it was a good friend of mine. Shout out to Luis. I'm going to give him the link to this. He and I had a text string going in January when they were first talking about this stuff, 2020. He said, I don't even know if there is a bug. And I was like, really? Interesting. I didn't defend it. I didn't push back, but I'm sure a lot of people would and did. I said, that's interesting. I'll have to look into that. And he sent me, I was familiar with John Rappaport from years and years ago, but he'd fallen off my radar. And so I started going to John Rappaport's page. That led me to just looking into all the different ways in which the paradigm is taken apart and credit is given to our bodies and our natural design to heal ourselves. And so my understanding is definitely transformed over the years, and it's come to a more full understanding and trust in that design and trust in our ability to take care of ourselves. But the first thing was just saying, wow, they've gone so far to pull something off without an it, which I think is getting to your point about people gathering and thinking, well, there still must be an it, and then who's going to save us from the it, or we need to take this potion or that potion. It's not the officially prescribed, maybe the arm dart or something like that, but it might be, IVM or HCQ, some other thing that's got a 3-letter acronym. And so people are always looking for something outside themselves rather than trusting our design. And hence my stressing that this is really, in a way, it's satanic, because it looks for human resolution to a natural situation. And you touched on something that's in my notes for talking about how does this play out in our society. Well, the price of eggs and the poor chickens that are being culled because there are claims of something out there, and then it's claimed to be contagious, and then something must be done. Well, we used this bogus test. I don't think we're going to get into the validity of the test today, but we'll just declare them bogus because they're not testing for an it. And but the methodology that they use comes up with an it. It declares that there's an it, and therefore something must be done. And what it leads to is, instead of looking for environmental solutions, like the poor hens or chickens might be in close quarters, they might be scratching each other, then have open wounds. They're living without proper air circulation, no sunlight. They're not eating a proper diet for their species, a species appropriate diet. All the various factors, just like when you have fish in a fish tank or bowl that are sick, do we look for an it when they become sick, or do we change the water? Why don't we just change the water, so to speak, metaphorically, when we have chickens that may be sick, or any kind of farm animals, any kind of husbandry that we're doing with animals for our food and nourishment? But no, we look for the it, and we test for it, and then we must cull them. And that's misery on a mass scale. And we're seeing it, the knock-on effect at the grocery store. It's terrible.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to unpack there. But one thing that I do want to mention, kind of along the satanic theme still, is if you have the awareness or enough awareness to have witnessed the gaslighting and witnessed the over-the-top propaganda that was happening back then, and to an extent is still lying in the background on some level, but you go to, let's say, the quote-unquote truth community or alternative media, there's always a net there to capture those people who are like, well, I'm not going with the mainstream explanation, so I'm going to the other direction. And I can think of a number of the people that we all found and listened to, at least for a little while when all this was going on. And, you know, even to this day, like if you go onto BitChute and try to watch a video, you'll see that they're still pumping ivermectin, which is pure poison. And there are people who will go to their grave declaring that, you know, it's a wonder drug. But it's one of those things where, you know, why do I bring up the Satanism aspect? It's because you have to consent to poisoning yourself, to destroying yourself in some way, whether it's ivermectin, HCQ, whatever. And also, as an extension of that, and it got Agent a lot of hate and his partner in crime, Medicine Girl, when they did that article on supplements and vitamins and how terrible those are for you. And it's another form of consent. You know, I've used this analogy before, but I think it's very true here, that you have to open the door for the vampire to come into your house, right? You have to consent. And one way or another, there is always a trap for you to destroy yourself. And that links to the satanic theme, because what is evil and darkness desire most? It's to bring down mankind and to facilitate their quicker than should be demise. And I just think that this goes back to the discernment part, that you have to be able to recognize that what you're looking at is indeed a trap, and to sidestep it, or, you know, turn your back on it completely. But ultra important that people realize that any direction you turn, there's always someone trying to sell you snake oil and get you to harm yourself. And, you know, I remember, I'll just throw a name out there. I remember that for a long time, many of us in the, you know, truth community, whatever you want to call it, were tuned into Del Bigtree and, you know, listening to his broadcasts. And it, you know, once I really started wrapping my mind around bug theory and its fraudulent ways, I was like, well, why isn't he denouncing it? And then it became really clear, like, oh, he's part of the controlled side of things and trying to steer people towards, that net that's been cast for people who, aren't paying strict attention. And so obviously I tuned him out and some of the similar voices, but I'm sure he still has a strong following of people who knew enough to not go along with one scheme, but maybe got caught in one of the alternative ones.
Yeah, he sure does. It's a big following. And my attention was definitely directed towards some people like that. I personally don't feel like I got led too far astray, but I think your point about opening the door and inviting the vampire in is really important. And we do stress that together on our show. And I think that in retrospect, when I said that, well, it didn't seem like it was possible that there was no there. But then in retrospect, when you actually look at the entire program, it would make more sense that there was no there, because if there was an actual bug, and let's say it was GOF, it was it escaped from a lab in Wuhan, then we would be innocent victims and we would have to fight it. But if it's completely on a psychological level, psychosomatic, and it's just a pandemic of fear, to quote a previous episode of ours, then you really ask for it in the mind of those that follow this satanic philosophy. You asked for it. You didn't have the discernment. We never forced you into anything. If you really get down into the nitty gritty, people were coerced. And of course, yeah, I feel really bad. There was lots of loss of jobs and real suffering. But no one ever came knocking on your door and was holding a needle and said, you need to take this. So strictly speaking, you did have a choice. And that's really the crux of this whole satanic paradigm, is it tries to override our trust in ourselves and our free will. It makes you feel like you have no choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I actually had to stand my ground at a former job where the coercion was happening, and I said no. And I fought them every step of the way, even up until the day that I resigned and took a different job, that, they were trying to force, they were clearly part of the agenda. They were trying to force everyone to take this intervention to be in the office. And, oh, by the way, you had to be in the office to keep your job. So that was, part of the, well, I can say no, or I can give in and do something to myself just in the name of a corporate job. And that's where people really have to determine what's important in life. And I felt that my autonomy was more important. And, obviously I could see through the propaganda and the potential danger that was approaching anyone who rolled up their sleeves for that intervention. So yeah, it's you really do. It's a consent thing. And, going back to the idea of the powers that be and the things they do. And, I think a lot of people might naturally wonder, well, why would they be putting all this symbolism out there? Why would they be flashing their brother man gang signs, if you know what I mean, and doing all that and putting the truth out there in plain sight? Well, they believe in some sort of karmic type of law where if they tell you what they're doing and you go along with it, or you don't resist it, then by default you have agreed to whatever it is that they're providing to you or dishing out. And so we really do have the choice. Right? Yeah, exactly. So in all cases, we have the choice of, what we do at the time that we have left here on this realm.
Yeah, and if we look at what's coming down the pike, very likely, that will be offered to us, we're going to have to face similar situations, and it could be maybe not just a matter of some kind of a medical so-called intervention. It could literally come down to the kind of system you're allowed to take part and participate in. If we get to central bank digital currencies tied into digital ID and social credit, and we will have a choice. The alternative could be very brutal, and I think it'll be designed to be brutal, very uncomfortable to the extreme, and some people might not survive the alternative, and they might not be prepared for that. I personally don't know if I'm prepared for that. I question that. But it will be a similar situation where we can probably expect that they're not going to go door to door and make you sign up for something. It's more a question of like, do you want the eggs that now cost 3 times as much as they used to? How are you going to pay for it? That sort of thing. Part of what I jotted down was the ways that we were meant to go against ourselves, divide amongst ourselves, and amplify the fear. And so I just wanted to kind of look back at a couple of those factors. And the one was the absolutely egregious introduction of the idea of social distancing, and that if you get near other people and you're in close quarters, then you could be harming them. And that's just absolutely horrible. And I still see those damn circles on the ground at some places. And whenever I see them, I want to just stamp on them or peel them off the floor or whatever I can do. I still see signs that say, wear a face diaper and social distance, things like that. So we had that. Then we had mandates and policies, and now we're seeing a lot of places that don't accept cash. Now look back to 5 years and less ago when they introduced this whole idea of contactless transactions. And, money is dirty, cash is dirty, and it could have bugs on it. It plays into this whole idea. You got to work from home. How many businesses closed because people weren't going out? So there are real consequences to the buy-in to this whole paradigm. And how could you not say it's satanic when we're looking at the consequences? Because it resulted in so much pain in so many ways. So I just wanted to look back at that. You're going to kill grandma. How many holiday gatherings were destroyed, and how many people were set against each other? And many of those relationships have not been repaired to this day because of the rifts that were caused during that period over something that we cannot find. Let's just put it that way. So I kind of wanted to get into what happens when you get to the point that we've come to, and you no longer fear these bugs. How is that? How does that liberated you, PJ?
Yeah, well, a lot to say on that, but I do want to kind of second what you were saying about some of these artifacts of 5 years ago still being around. I think it was maybe late 2023. I'll just say I can't remember the exact time frame, but you may have seen this given your travels, your infrequent travels to the East Coast. But I was passing through LaGuardia, and they had just done a big renovation of that airport. And as I was walking in, I noticed on the glass door there were indications of having to wear a face diaper and social distance. And I was like, we're past the official period of, when all this was supposed to be necessary, yet it was permanently etched in the glass of the door. And I said, you know what? I don't think that's by accident. I think that was an intentional artifact to be carried forward. Like there was no, oh, well, maybe we just need to do this for a few more months. Like permanently etching it on the glass door to me said, this is something that will come back on some level.
Wow.
Yeah, it really hit me when I saw it that, like, there was intentional design in having that permanently etched into the door.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just passed through LaGuardia yesterday, actually. So those of you that may be watching the video may notice I'm not in my usual environs, and I'm also wearing sunglasses for a particular health reason, actually. You wouldn't want to see my eye right now. But yeah, so did you want to get into how we can, what happens when we're free from this paradigm and this satanic program that is being indoctrinated in us and literally injected into us from birth for most of the population?
Yeah, well, I mean, and I referred to this a little bit, I believe, in the past episode, but, I used to carry around a bottle of hand sanitizer everywhere I went. You could be, let's say, for example, going through a drive-through and want to eat a sandwich or something, and it's like you don't have a way to wash your hands, and so out comes the hand sanitizer, and I used to swear by it, and I remember once I probably called myself a germaphobe, and now I look back and just laugh at my old self. But it really is freedom to realize that there isn't a need for any of that, and that obviously you want to use common sense before eating, like if you had your hands on dirty things or whatever. There's common sense to be applied to a lot of this, but this idea that we might have these deadly germs hanging out on our hands, and it really is a mental prison, like many of the other mental prisons out there. And I can't remember off the top of my head whose quote this is, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because of the platform we're on, but there was a quote from, I believe, somewhere in the earlier 1900s that someone had said, if bug theory were true, no one would be alive to talk about it. And if you think about like the way people have always eaten, they pick up their bread or whatever and they just eat it. They don't really give consideration about, oh, now we have to go do whatever, remove all the healthy bacteria off of our hands before we eat. Like there was never a notion of that. And if that were really a thing, then obviously the human race would have had quite a challenge to still be here. And, furthermore, the same thing can be said as you've alluded to in pharmaceuticals, that we don't need any of that. Like our body can truly repair itself, and it was meant to repair itself. And I will say, going into this episode, one of the ways that I refreshed my memory on a lot of these points was rewatching a classic, and I definitely recommend, for those who haven't watched it, by Spacebusters, there's a video called The End of Germ Theory, which is excellent, and I don't know how anyone could watch that and then still go back to the old paradigm afterwards. Anyway, I think that's a classic, and worth revisiting, as well as Dr. Cowan's book, The Contagion Myth. I recommend that one for those who may not have read it. And then on top of that, even still, I would say that Virus Mania, and I can't remember the authors of that off the top of my head, but that's another classic to really...
Torsten Engelbricht and some other co-author, and then Sam Bailey got involved.
That's right.
And definitely, speaking of Spacebusters, Steve Falconer of Spacebusters did a collaboration with Mark Bailey, making a video series of Mark Bailey's paper, which is basically undebunkable, if that's a word, and it's called Farewell to Virology. And I think Steve Falconer, the man behind Spacebusters, he got a lot of information from Mark Bailey and Samantha Bailey and the work that they've done, as well as some of the other people you've mentioned, Dr. Tom Cowan and others. Amanda Vollmer is another good one. So I guess for those curious, there is no it. If you'd like to know why there's no it and how you can take responsibility for your own health and demand accountability for those that are poisoning you, which is what I'd love to get into a little bit, then these are really great resources. I've never met any of these people in person, so I can't say 100%. Every name that we ever give is 100% correct. but these are people that I trust in this, with the information in this area, and it expands beyond the it of 2020, and they've done really good takedowns on other things such as polio, and why the polio vaccine, when it was introduced, only caused more, poisoning of people, and what is declared as the end of that had already almost ended because of certain environmental factors and the elimination of toxins, and especially lead arsenic, and the spraying of DDT, for instance. And the same goes for with the red bumps that that are in the news right now. That was down to a trickle, and in fact, the introduction of the injections causes that, the same symptoms. And there's more malarkey as far as like how is a case counted when it comes to that. And so I can give a shout out to Anthony Colpo, who's a Substacker from Australia, who did a fantastic article of recent vintage about how we got here with the red bumps, measles, and why that's a bunch of I want to say effery when it comes to that. But let's get into the idea of liberation from bug theory. What does it do for us? So I'll just put it out there on a personal level. It liberates us from fear on so many levels, from the idea of bugs and germs, from fear of contact, like we just mentioned. No more social distancing. I'm going to hug grandma. There's only so many times that I'm hanging out with grandma. I'm going to give grandma a big hug and not fear that I'm going to be sick from grandma, that grandma's going to be sick. And the same goes for kids who always have the sniffles. Take care of yourself. Go hug a kid. That's your kid, at least. And don't fear the sniffles, because you're not going to get it from a kid. And so there's no more fear of getting other people sick. And I will mention that this whole idea of the interventions, we need to outline this paradigm that says that there's one germ, one disease. So it's almost like, round hole, round peg, square hole, square peg kind of thing, where, these are the symptoms. We define it as one thing, therefore there's one cure. And of course we have the magic potion that cures that. So this gives us liberation from that whole paradigm. And we can look into other factors, the toxicity, the lack of sleep, diet, are we drinking, stress, lifestyle factors, all these different things. We can actually turn around and start addressing what really makes us ill. And there's a great book by Dawn Lester, and I'm forgetting her collaborator, but David is his name. What Really Makes Us Ill? Go look at that. What makes us ill? And if we stop looking for the it as far as one germ, one disease, we can end up getting beyond that and start demanding accountability for clean, real environmentalism that isn't based on just carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and start saying, well, what are you spraying in our skies? What are you spraying on our crops? All this effery that's going on in our environment. So this is the beginning for me. How about you, PJ?
Yeah, and I think just along those lines of the liberation from the fear, it's one of the conversations I got into last night that turned into a little bit of a debate. The person had indicated that she believed in bug theory and had basically said, oh well, the bugs by themselves are harmless, but then it's what man is doing to them and making them dangerous. And it was just like another level of fear. And I was pushing back on that a little bit, and I said, because this person had said, oh well, I know someone who's a scientist and blah blah blah, and they've got pictures of it. They've got pictures of these things. And I said, do you know what those pictures are and how they get those pictures? And she's like, no, but someone else does. And I was like, Yeah, I wonder if that person also realizes that this whole process of getting to the point of the electron microscope taking the static image introduces many steps, many different types of cellular debris, many types of chemicals such as formaldehyde and ethylene glycol, putting all that witch's brew onto a plate and letting it culture, starving it of nutrients. Gee, I wonder why a cell might suddenly burst open and start the process of death or apoptosis when subjected to starvation and the introduction of a bunch of chemicals. And so when one looks at one of those still images and they say, there's the thing, right? Well, what are they actually looking at? And, you know, the classic Koch's postulate has never truly been fulfilled by those in mainstream institutions for good reason, because if they did, they would quickly learn that there is no there. And the great Dr. Stefan Lanka has performed some of these type of experiments and shown, you know, with 100% certainty that the quote unquote cytopathic effect is truly an artificial one, that when you run real control experiments, you will see you can create that cell bursting and cell death through those series of actions. And so, you know, that's a long-winded way of saying that one doesn't have to worry about gain of fiction or any of, you know, similar type of baddies coming our way, because it's really just one more fear tactic. And that's what I find really important for people to wrap their minds around, that when you do realize where these images come from and how they're created, it's once again, the emperor has no clothes.
Absolutely. And I think of Tom Cowan ran an experiment where he had his cat Pumpkin pick out what was the electron micrograph of something claimed to be a bug, and Pumpkin was right more than wrong or something. It was just hilarious. So when I look at electron micrographs of purported bugs, I just laugh, because Tom Cowan has such a great way of a humorous but informative way of really pointing you to reasons why you don't need to be fearful of these things. He pokes fun at it, and humor is a really good antidote to fear. And we need to have a sense of humor about some of these things, even though there are deadly consequences potentially. Just think of all the antagonism between people and among people that could be eliminated. Things like school mandates for armed darts. You have to have all these armed darts to be able to go to your indoctrination centers. That's another discussion. Maybe we can talk about one of these days. What is taught? What is a school? And but okay, so there's a lot of people that want to have their children in school, and then, well, there's this mandate. They got to have this and that. They got to be updated on their armed darts. We could eliminate that. No more discussion of that. Not to mention the toxic consequences of having those from birth all the way through. Oh, well, you're in this grade, you need to update to here and there. Think of all the financial resources that could be freed up from pharmaceutical research, from the pharmacogenetic research, because pharmacogenomic is the proper terms. It's because they're looking in the wrong direction. They're not looking for the right things. And just think of how freeing it is for people to say, hey, I'm going to take accountability for my own life and my own health, because I have the tools to be healthy and free. That's liberating. It's how many people have you go to the gym? How many people do you know who have looked in the mirror at one point and said, I need to take accountability for my health, and they did something about it, and they started some kind of an exercise regimen or diet regimen or both, and they had great results, because it starts with personal accountability, and they're not looking for a solution outside themselves. That's where it begins. And so when we stop doing that, that's when we can start looking for real solutions in the environment and demanding that accountability. And that's why I find this this compulsion to have an it and to be a victim of these things that are attacking us, this war paradigm, which ends up in a zero-sum kind of game as well. We must constantly have a war on this, a war on that. We have the war on drugs, the war on terror. Now we have the war on bugs. It never ends well, right? And we never win. Well, in this case, we're actually warring against the phantom that we agree has not been discovered, not been found in reality. And it's a waste of so much. It's just a big waste, and it's very damaging, and it's deadly in many cases.
Yeah, and actually you brought up something that, just talking about real life consequences of all this, and you brought up the gym, and the gym that I go to provides all these I guess you would call them sanitary wipes and I see so many people who will like wipe a whole station down before they use it, and then use it and then wipe it back down, and I'm like, that's just pure poison that you're putting into your pores. Like, none of that is necessary. And I will often try to stop someone from doing it when it's my turn for something that I've been waiting on. And if I'm able to stop them, they usually give me this weird look like, you don't want this? And I was like, no, I don't want that poison on my skin. Thank you very much. I mean, I don't say it like that, but it's sort of expected that people do this, and there's just no need for it.
We haven't touched on the whole idea of having an immune system, and I think maybe that's even a topic on its own. But I did want to introduce the idea that once you get to understanding that we are equipped to be self-sustaining in a healthy manner, then the whole paradigm of an immune system it needs to be boosted, not necessarily with the outside injections, but you got to boost your immune system. You need the immune system to fight off attackers, like we need sentries to stand guard. All of these things, it's that war paradigm. And I think for the first domino to fall was maybe there is no it, but I still have an immune system. And now I've come to the point where I think even the paradigm of having an immune system still feeds into that whole war paradigm that it's us versus nature. And I believe that domino needs to fall as well on a larger scale. Just the idea that it's us versus nature, it's us versus the bugs. And instead, we just need to look at things as we're just one big sanitation system, and our body is a self-cleaning oven. And when we have something going on, the body's taking care of itself. Sometimes it needs a little help with some extra rest, or maybe some better nutrition, or whatever it is, but it doesn't necessarily need to have that boost or turbocharge of something that's from outside of that we take. And so that was a big breakthrough for me as well. I don't even think in terms of an immune system.
Yeah, actually, so the aforementioned video from Spacebusters that I had recommended, they touch on that towards the end, talking about how there have been experiments that prove that antibodies are not always specific, as we've been told, that they can their binding behavior can be changed by the pH of the environment they're in or other environmental factors. And so this idea of these, helper cells and specific antibodies, they're largely, cartoons for academics to feel smart about everything they memorized. But the reality of the situation doesn't really match the cartoons that you see in most textbooks. And in that video, they bring up the idea that antibodies are really globulins, and you could think of them as globulins because they show up when you have an injury. A cell has an injury, they immediately go to work in repairing that injury, and that's their real function. But that, as you say, that's a step. You have to kind of first get to there is no there to then go, okay, how much of this is real? And even an extension of this that you may have heard Dr. Cowan talk about before is, he's even questioned, and I'm trying to remember the professor that he has recommended that got him thinking in this direction. Maybe you can recall off the top of your head, but there is a professor who kind of started the train of thought that maybe even the diagrams that we see of the cell and the way that we're told that the cell behaves are largely fiction too, based on the preparation methods that were used to create those images and diagrams, and that perhaps some of the things that we have accepted as cellular behavior are not based in reality and are in fact an artifact of the preparation process, very similar to electronic microscopy, that to get some of those images that have been shown on TV and what have you, those actually are the product of cellular starvation and poisoning, and that's what's actually what you're seeing when you're seeing these round circular bits coming off of a cell. And anyway, it's food for thought and perhaps a future discussion. But yeah, I agree with you that the idea of immune system kind of fits into that warlike paradigm, that as you say, we're somehow at odds with nature, and I don't believe that to be the case.
Absolutely not. And I don't recall exactly the name of the researcher that Tom Cowan gives credit to, but I do recall that he's pointed that out many times. And he has also posited that what we see as ribosomes could actually just literally be bubbles, like air bubbles under the microscope, because nothing in nature is perfect circles. And they're always perfect circles. Bubbles are perfect circles, generally, especially under a microscope. So, again, I love that you brought up non-specific antibodies, and so then there we go again with the that negates the idea that we can test, right? That there's an antibody for the one germ, one disease paradigm, and therefore there must be one antibody to fight that one germ. And we need to have it or give it aid and boost it and help it out. And Mike Stone has done some really great work on Virology, that website, virology.org. On antibodies, and he's also done a lot of work in demonstrating that we do have antibodies, the globules, and they help take out the trash. That's part of that whole process of sanitation, but they're non-specific. It's just when something is bad for you, the body says, out of here, packages it up in trash bags of a biological sort, and takes it out. We have various organs and methods of elimination. And there you go. Trust the plan, God's plan.
Amen to that. And, I think the point that I would want to close on, or at least another parting thought, that when we talked last week about the moon landings or supposed moon landings and how they were pulled off, it wouldn't have been possible without the TV, right? And everything that was pumped through the big hypnotic box in the corner of your room or wherever that sits. And, the t-shirt I'm wearing right now is intentional because, back in 2020, I would often joke that I didn't get that bug because I just turned the TV off, right? And TV is so powerful in influencing minds and getting people to believe in the illusion. And I don't think what we witnessed 5 years ago would have even been possible without TV.
No, I think the whole modern paradigm of this whole bug theory and a lot of the different fears that are drummed up and spread around are only possible in the age of mass media. And again, looking way beyond ourselves in our communities and what we can do. We've touched on this in previous episodes. making concerns that aren't really your concerns and don't affect you something to worry about. And then also feeding into this whole idea of victim mentality. It's, poor, woe is me. Somebody's out to get me, including invisible, non-existent particles. Yeah. And I have a similar t-shirt, by the way, that says, Amish virus protection, turn off the Talmud vision. Oops, did I say that? Turn off the TV. Yeah.
That's great. Well, you'll have to cue that up for a future episode then.
I will indeed. Yeah.
Well, Jake, this feels like a natural conclusion to today's discussion. I sort of already gave my parting thoughts. Anything you want to close with?
I just want to stress to people, maybe you haven't looked into this. First of all, start with the idea that your body you started out whole and perfect, and ask yourself if all of these interventions have really added up to health. Ask yourself over the course of the last decades and maybe centuries, has our health as a society improved with the introduction of all these has our health as a society improved with the introduction of all these interventions and the adding up of these interventions and the mandating of schedules for interventions? Are children healthier with getting 72 mandated or recommended interventions? There's autism is off the charts. Childhood disease is going crazy, off the charts. Cancer is at an all-time high. Are we healthier? We are intervening more and more, and we're not as healthy as we were. So I'll answer the question, but ask yourself that question. And I did want to close by giving a shout out to Manny. So I'm going to send this link to somebody I met yesterday who I really hope checks out our podcast. Really cool guy named Manny who's on a really interesting journey. And it started with taking accountability. And so I really hope Manny is able to hear this podcast and become a listener. So, and good luck with everything, Manny. You're an awesome dude, and I hope I see you again.
Well, I can only hope to meet Manny with that sort of endorsement, and definitely well wishes to him and whatever his journey has coming next. And well, I'll also close with just saying that I can't believe we made it to 10 episodes and we did it. And let's keep it rolling. I hope everyone's been enjoying the ride, and we definitely look forward to people's comments. And if anyone has suggestions for something for us to cover in a future episode, we're all ears. So lot still to come and more guests that we want to have on. So yeah, stay tuned.
See you next time.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.